Well everyone, it's now officially been 5 years since The Last of Us Part 2 released, and quite recently, we saw the Season 2 finale of HBO's TV adaptation of the famous game franchise. This show, and this season in particular, have proven to be incredibly controversial, perhaps more so than the game, which is really saying something, and that's not because the backlash was necessarily worse or larger, but because it came from people with actual substantive critiques and, frankly, intelligence. 5 years ago, I staunchly defended The Last of Us Part 2, saying it was not just great, but one of the best video games I had ever played. And while the first season of this show went down well with just about everyone, there were concerns from before Season 1 even premiered about how the second game's story would fare with a TV audience. But personally, I took issue with some parts of the show even in its widely acclaimed first season, and Season 2 just exacerbated these problems to the point that they can no longer be ignored. So in this video, we're going to talk about what went wrong in both of the first seasons of HBO's The Last of Us, and how they can get themselves out of this rut in Season 3. Starting with Season 1, I think it's immediately worth noting how great the show started off. The opening scenes of the first 2 episodes were unforgettable, chilling additions to the world of The Last of Us, and the way those episodes handled the events of the game itself felt extremely smooth. And then we of course have Episode 3, which strangely enough ended up being met with a similar fate to the second game. It was review bombed by some of the dumbest people on planet Earth who were too big of babies to handle watching a gay love story, but praised by nearly everyone else. Personally, I found the episode absolutely perfect. It was moving, excellently paced, and felt like the show's greatest contribution to the world building. It was unfortunate that due to this we didn't get any of the hilarious banter between Ellie and Bill that's in the game.
Huh? Yeah, sure, Joel. Go ahead. Take my card. Take all my food, too, while you're at it.
By the looks of it, you could lose some of that food.
Listen to me, you little sh**.
But I think this episode made up for that, and even after that, the part of the game in Pittsburgh, which was changed to Kansas City for some reason, was handled insanely well. I mainly want to point out the fact that the vast majority of the scenes in episodes 4 and 5 weren't even really in the game, because I think it goes to show that the people behind the show are totally capable of adapting the games in a more loose manner. The stuff with Sam and Henry was heartbreaking, the action scenes were top-notch, and it all felt perfectly executed. They took the highlights of the game and did them justice, while also creating new bombastic scenes, and not forgetting to leave in some downtime and slower moments to keep things well-paced. However, it's after the incredible high point that was Episode 5, which I'd go so far as to say is the best episode of the whole show, that things started to go downhill. Episode 6 was still pretty damn solid, though I found the part at the university somewhat rushed and empty. Rather than feeling like they were prioritizing the best moments for the sake of an efficient adaptation, it started to feel like they were desperately running through the story like a series of bullet points. And while the adaptation of the Left Behind DLC in Episode 7 is damn near perfect if you ask me, it's in the last 2 episodes where this flaw becomes utterly destructive. My favorite part of the game by far is Winter, so I was really hoping they'd do it justice. However, I think it's where they actually squandered the story quite a bit. You see, nothing in this episode was necessarily bad, and there are plenty of moments that are done justice, like when David reveals his disgusting intentions, when Ellie finally kills him, or even Joel's interrogation scene. It just comes down to the aforementioned pacing. Winter is a huge, vital part of the game, but unlike the stuff in Pittsburgh that got 2 episodes so it was fully fleshed out and developed, they try to rush through all of it in under an hour, which is a foolish decision if you ask me. I get that there are limits on how many episodes you can actually do, but if it's at the expense of one of the most vital parts of the story and robs the culmination of everything that's built up between Ellie and Joel of even a little bit of its tension, then maybe it's not worth it to, for example, include the Left Behind story in this season. I'm sure they could have convinced HBO to give them a 10-episode run, in which case they could have treated this part and the ending with the care they deserved, but instead, it felt rushed and sloppy and ultimately left me feeling underwhelmed at the end of the season, even though the first 2/3 of it were damn near perfect. But what we're really here to talk about is the second season, which didn't just have some moments fall flat because of poor pacing, but had multiple episodes that I thought were just flat out bad. Let's begin with the Season 2 premiere. This was an episode that immediately gave me a bad feeling. In fact, multiple people who I know who loved the first season hated this episode so much that they stopped watching the show immediately after. That's not a good sign. A significant part of this episode feels rather pointless. That's part of the problem. I like how they set up the town of Jackson more thoroughly than in the game, and of course, they do devote time to establishing Ellie and Joel's fraught relationship, as well as her blossoming connection to Dina, but it all feels, frankly, amateur. Certain scenes retain emotional maturity, such as Joel's conversation with the therapist, but as soon as the adults leave the room and we're left with Dina and Ellie, things start to feel like a fucking Disney Plus show. I really quite liked both of these characters, at least at the beginning in the game, but here they feel way less mature and likable. Ellie's emotional volatility no longer feels purposeful and intriguing, but rather like some annoying whining, and Dina's been reduced to an immature accomplice who just goes along with every stupid thing Ellie decides to do. These characters are supposed to be 19, but they act less mature and with less logical instincts than Ellie and Riley did in Left Behind when they were around 13 or 14. This is particularly present when they abandon their patrol and go after some infected in a store. This scene in the game is great. It's a way of introducing some combat, and it's not some arbitrary, idiotic decision made by Tweedledee and Tweedledina, but a task they're meant to carry out. And of course, they then have to get chewed out by Maria and lie about what happened like this is some high school drama story. It's actually really insulting to the characters, and I am stunned that Neil Druckmann was okay with this at all. Not to mention, the way Ellie acts toward Joel is completely ridiculous. She's angry at him in the game too, but shows that anger by ignoring him and being a bit despondent. Instead, in the show, she feels much more like an angry little kid, which undermines the actual horrors of what Joel did, as well as our ability to take her seriously in the slightest. Most of this episode feels cheesy, childish, and flat out unnecessary. And while we're on the issue of childish, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. Now, most of my critiques in this video have to do with the writing and very nuanced parts of the storytelling. But we really can't go without addressing Bella Ramsey's controversial performance as Ellie. In the first season, I think she did a really good job of bringing the character to life. She had sort of an unbreakable spirit, a rebellious, youthful attitude that was mixed with a softer side, and this came out near the end as she got closer to Joel, which played a huge role in making their relationship work almost as well in the show as it did in the game. However, if it were up to me, I would have recast her for the second season. Now, I know that she's older than the character of Ellie, and I know that she's commented on this extensively, but I can't unsee what I've seen, which is a thoroughly immature performance that does this character no justice whatsoever. Ellie in the second game is a mature woman who gradually loses her composure in a way that turns her into a psychotic murderer, not in a way that turns her into a whining little baby. And I get that the time skip is technically only 5 years, but it has a massive impact on the character, at least not the same at all in the second game. So it's not like I expect Bella Ramsey to be great at playing both, because that's extremely hard to pull off, but then it seems idiotic to have the same actress for both seasons. Her performance isn't always bad, but she fails to pull off a lot of the most important aspects of the character. Her anger and sadness just don't feel tragic or genuine, and instead alienate us right off the bat. Even though the second episode has some fantastic moments, with all the action sequences involving the Horde, as well as Joel's death being truly spectacular, and the third is a really good, slower-paced introspection into Jackson, and some character arcs that aren't really developed in the game as much, the season pretty much falls apart once Dina and Ellie get to Seattle. I was actually starting to be hopeful after episode 3, as Ellie was a much more mature and believable character in it, and I loved a lot of the new things they added, like this new way of introducing the Seraphites, this whole council meeting, and the beautiful scene of Ellie visiting Joel's grave. Not to mention, the therapist character is absolutely hilarious, and I'd watch a whole spin-off about her. A lot of these issues really kick into high gear once we get to episode 4, which is also reflected in the show's IMDb scores, which fell off a cliff here. It went from a nearly spotless record, even in spite of some homophobic review bombing, to a much less stable project. So let's talk about it. Day 1. Is it really that bad? Well, it doesn't start out that way. In fact, I'd argue its cold open introducing Jeffrey Wright's Isaac is fantastic, and the other scenes involving him throughout the episode are also great, especially when he tortures a Seraphite prisoner. That was faithfully recreated and added to. Bravo. The scenes with Ellie and Dina are fine enough. They're at times slightly annoying and often pale in comparison to the dialogue in the game, but I'm glad they kept some downtime to represent the amazing open world segment of Day 1 in the game. And hell, even the sequence in the subway station where they're fighting both WLF and Infected is pretty intense and rather well directed. I do find it sort of over the top, trying too hard to make it even more action-packed than the game, and in the process, making it feel less believable and immersive. For example, while some argue that it's better for Dina to let herself get bit by a zombie to save Dina than to sacrifice her gas mask like she does in the game because it's more heroic, I think it removes the subtlety and feels more haphazard and cliché. But this episode all comes crashing down in about the last 10 minutes. You see, it's somewhat similar to what happens in the game, where Ellie has to explain her immunity to Dina at gunpoint, and Dina reveals that she's pregnant. But there are two baffling additions that make this so stupid. First off, after saying I'm immune and I'm pregnant, the two of them randomly decide to have sex. It's a very jarring scene that feels like a desperate attempt to accumulate as much intensity as possible. And this, combined with their more juvenile portrayals of the characters, contributes to that amateur feeling I was talking about earlier. And I'm sorry, but the "I'm gonna be a dad" line is not only very corny, but feels absurdly inappropriate. The two of them bumping uglies comes before Joel's death in the game, and after his death, Ellie is very despondent and depressed. You know, not exactly in the mood for a fucking rumble in the hay. So having this scene here doesn't just feel jarring in the moment, but destroys the consistency of Ellie's emotions that play such a massive role in making this whole story work. We're supposed to feel for her after Joel dies and share the anger that she has, the anger that she uses as justification for more and more depraved acts, which eventually alienate us from her. That's the relationship between the audience and Ellie that's so important to have here. Instead, she's immediately unlikable, and then after Joel dies, she doesn't seem to give a shit after episode 3. So, what is she even doing all of this for? And what are we even watching this shit for? The emotional bond is gone here, which basically renders the deeper narrative completely ineffective, regardless of any standout moments or scenes. And the fact that at the end of the episode, they decide that Dina should come with Ellie into a war zone right after finding out that she's pregnant makes me fucking furious. Why did they do that? This is such a pointless and stupid change. And worst of all is the fact that the next episode, aka possibly the worst in the whole series, uses this as an excuse to turn one of the best parts of the game into what feels like a mix of a teen romance and a buddy cop movie. The two of them never shut the fuck up this whole episode, even talking very loudly while facing off Infected. Plus, I love how one of them has to explain every single step of all their little plans, and then they have to debate it back and forth. Sure, I can get a little of that, but they're supposed to be pretty good at this by now, so you'd expect some more proficiency. Just saying, if it was Joel and Ellie, he'd make like 3 hand signals and they'd be on their damn merry way.
So the front entrance looks like a security door. There's a camera right over it, which means we go around the back.
You sure about that? And?
They're on a hill, so they'll see us coming. So we wait until dark and we head out on foot.
You see that fencing over there? I'm gonna lure as many as I can. You're gonna run in there, secure the gate, secure however you can, and stay in there.
Dina, I can get bit a lot. You can't. Do as I say.
Episode 4 was pretty decent until its atrocious ending, but Episode 5 is actually unsalvageable. It once again has a pretty great cold open, that of course has nothing to do with these two, but the whole rest is a fucking train wreck. Calling it a Disney Plus show is more accurate than ever with this episode. All of the dialogue between Ellie and Dina feels honestly like a time waster. These characters aren't interesting or likable like in the game, so I find myself just waiting around until the next action scene, mainly because the dialogue in question is primarily just them bickering about whether or not they should let the next action scene happen. All of this is just small potatoes though, because unlike the last episode, this one can't even get the action scenes right. The part with the stalkers is embarrassingly lame, especially because that's one of my favorite parts of the entire game. Going through that office building full of them was terrifying, in part because you were all alone, not chatting it up with your annoying girlfriend. And the fact that Jesse just so happens to find them right as they're getting killed is some of the biggest bullshit contrivance I've ever seen. I mean, did they look at all of the subtlety and nuance within the game's story and just decide they didn't need it? This is such a cliche, stupid thing to have in a story that I'm almost pissed I have to critique it. But this episode only gets worse when they rush through a totally nothing burger confrontation with the WLF and then somehow just run into the Seraphites 30 feet away. Are we supposed to think that Seattle is like a fucking Minecraft world at night with all the monsters around every corner? They shoot Dina in the leg with an arrow in a laughable scene, and then of course Ellie runs another 5 minutes and is suddenly in the WLF hospital, where we get an admittedly pretty good recreation of the scene where she kills Nora. But don't get it twisted, that does not make up for how much of a shit show the rest of this is. I mean, pretty much every action scene has at least one or two bafflingly stupid decisions in it, not to mention how quickly and haphazardly everything is paced basically takes my complaint about Season 1, Episode 8 and rubs it in my fucking face. Seattle Day 2 is a huge part of the game with tons of locations, most of which are not even in this episode. At least they managed to include a lot of the highlights of winter in Season 1, but this time they didn't even try. This isn't a Cliff Notes summary of the game, this is a fucking checklist where they just did the bare minimum to introduce us to all these different factions. Nothing in all of those neighborhoods and houses, nothing in the sewer system, none of those great fights against the Seraphites. What were they thinking here? This is similar to the last episode though, which was also missing multiple really great parts from the game. I get that they can't do every single thing faithfully, that's fine, but then do it like episodes 4 and 5 of the last season and weave the best moments together with new scenes into a coherent adaptation, not just a soulless mimic. Episode 6 is where things actually get a lot better content-wise, as pretty much the whole episode is flashbacks of Ellie and Joel's relationship and showing us how it got to the point it was at the beginning of this season. And a lot of these scenes are very endearing. Some of them are actually unforgettable and really cool additions. And I really like this episode by itself. But the issue lies within its placement. In the game, these flashbacks come as interludes between all of the days in Seattle, and while I understand that they didn't want to do that, it almost feels like this episode would have been better as the season premiere. It contextualizes why Ellie is mad at Joel really well, and thus prevents her from being as unlikable in the ensuing moments. And while we're on the subject, I do want to say that I was actually really surprised that they decided to follow the game's structure and give a whole season to Ellie and then a whole season to Abby. And while I don't think that's necessarily a problem, and in fact, I'm for the idea generally, I think that means they should have asked for a couple of extra episodes, 2 or preferably 3, so that they could actually flesh out the world more, fix the pacing issues, and, include more from the game. But instead, the season finale is another rushed train wreck with baffling scene after baffling scene. Bella Ramsey's poor performance really stands out here.
It wasn't in the best interest of the community.
Fuck the community!
Pretty harsh.
As she seems more than ever like a petulant child, and almost all of the best moments are gone. We don't get the fight in the arcade against the bloater or really any of the cool boat segment, and instead they waste time on certain new scenes that feel extremely unnecessary. Why is there this part with her getting captured by Seraphites, and why do they spare her? It's a stupid, contrived scene that's not in the game and serves absolutely zero purpose. And the scene of her killing Owen and Mel is also really poor, if you ask me. The addition of Mel asking her to perform a C-section on her is way too much. It's not chilling like the subtle discovery of Mel being pregnant that's in the game. It just feels edgy and stupid. And as we get to the final scene, the episode and season as a whole have done such a bad job of getting me invested that I don't care at all about Jesse getting shot, and the bizarre addition of Abby shooting Ellie in a cliffhanger feels laughable.
Wasted it.
Ultimately, this season is a letdown in almost every conceivable way. It does have some great standout moments, and it starts out pretty great, but the majority of the stuff in Seattle is ass. And, they're missing some very important things. There are very few encounters at all with the WLF. There are almost no encounters with the Seraphites, except for that fucking one in the season finale that don't even get me started on that again. And, what about Shamblers? The new infected type that were introduced in the second game. They don't show up at all. We don't have the scene in the arcade. We don't have the part in the sewers. The part in the office is a fucking neutered husk of what it was in the game. Don't have stuff with the boat. Don't have stuff at Eastbrook Elementary. Don't have stuff at the bank, or the courthouse, or the parking garage. And again, as I said when I talked about episodes 4 and 5 of season 1, you don't have to include every single thing. Not expecting that. They failed to translate the characters' personalities and emotions to screen despite going from polygons to people. And ultimately, through all of these stupid decisions and changes, they've lost the number one most important thing. The journey that the audience goes on with Ellie is gone. The first season was overall really good with just a few hiccups at the end. But in this new set of episodes, good becomes the exception, with most of it being a blatant failure. So how can we salvage this show? Well, for starters, the fact that Season 3 will focus on Abby is already promising. Her story is more bombastic and exciting to begin with, and it seems like her actress is more fitting for the role. I don't like that they already unveiled her motivation for killing Joel, as that really undermined what's supposed to be a hatred for her in the first half of the story, but I do understand that that's a controversial opinion. Overall, they're gonna need a lot more episodes, perhaps 2 whole seasons. They need to maintain the subtlety from the games and reserve drama and action for appropriate moments. And most of all, they need to make the characters likable and interesting, rather than whiny and annoying. With the right changes, they could save this show and deliver a fantastic 3rd season. But as it stands right now, this is an adaptation that is disappointing and bordering on disastrous. So 5 years after I defended and expressed my admiration for the game that this was based on, I have to say, Neil Druckmann, we deserve better.